Hey, welcome back to Unschooled Theology. I am one of your hosts, Derick, and with me is Evan. Evan, how are we doing today?
You're doing fantastic. How about
Okay.
yourself?
Plug it along, plug it along.
I
Not
know.
not been getting enough sleep lately, but
Oh man.
it happens. It happens.
Yeah, it does.
All right. So today we are going to begin to look at the creation of man here, and so real quick, as always, let's read Genesis 1:26 and 27. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. So, okay, there's a lot here. The
Mhm.
next couple episodes here are gonna focus around just these couple of verses, but the first thing I want to get into quickly here is at the very beginning where God says, "Let us make man in our image," and this is controversial to say the least. There has been much debate and much written around what this is a reference to. Um, some some people argue that it's a reference to the Trinity, which the ancient author of this would have had no concept of. So that ancient author must necessarily have had some other like explanation in their head for why
Yeah.
that reference.
Why use the
So
plural? Yeah.
yeah. So I don't necessarily see that. Others see it as referring to angels. If you look at Dr. Michael Heiser and his unseen realm ideas, he would see it as a reference to God's divine counsel, which the phrase "the sons of God" is also seen as referring to. Um, all of those are arguments, you know. I mean, I don't think we're ever going to have the exact answer anytime soon on what that's a reference to. But
Sometimes
go ahead.
let me just interject
Yeah,
here. My
yeah.
my my this isn't my actual opinion, but there's part of me that enjoys the idea that if you ever listen to well, maybe say like Bob Dylan lyrics or some other poet or something, I think sometimes they put words in there and just think to themselves, I wonder what people are going to do with that.
Right, right, right.
So I do like the
There's,
I
yeah,
I like the offshot that the writer of this just simply said, what if I just put the plural in here and see what people think?
let's see what they do with that.
I don't
Uh,
think that's likely because I think,
no,
I mean, if we want to get anthropological here and say that potentially this is a was oral tradition before it was written down, which I feel seems potentially reasonable.
mhm.
That means that this has gone through a filtering process, and the idea of us let us make this is connected, with the creation of man. That means that was filtered for a very long time. So it had significance. It had staying power. It was
Yes,
important for that to stay plural.
yes.
So I think looking closely at it is important. But I do like the offshot of just the person trying to mess with people.
Yes, no, that's a fun one for sure, definitely. Okay, so what I'm going to say here stems a bit from what we've discussed before, and I'll put a link into it here. That the idea of God being infinite, that's sort of a necessary component for what I'm going to suggest here. But I'm going to make a case for this us that is a little bit different. And I'm gonna make an argument that that plural actually is talking more about humanity than God.
Mm.
Because the key here is that God is referencing not just the creation of a human or a couple of humans. This is a reference to the creation of all of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And so my argument would be that, and it ties to what we're going to talk about in the next episode, some what it means to be the image of God. Okay, and this is a rather significant thing, but in part, I would say that perhaps what God is describing here is saying that humanity collectively, and us, uh, is meant to represent the image of God. So it's not that one individual human can accomplish this idea of being the image of God, because that's far too lofty a goal for any single human to achieve, unless they are in fact God and Jesus. We get that, obviously, the fulfillment of that idea there, but rather this is about God's vision for humanity as a whole. And so when God says, let us make man in our image, it's a way of saying that man as a whole, the us of humanity, will be the equivalent of the image of God. And by using the plurals here, God is telling us that there are many different facets, many different parts of being that image of God. And in a way, we could reference this a little bit to, and perhaps it relates to, and they're shadows of each other or references to each other. We talk about the church as the body of Christ, and we understand that within the church, there are different components, right? And each of us have different roles. It's not that we're all, soldier duplicates of each other once we exist together as the body of Christ, right? We have different things that we do within that body and different aspects. And so what God does here in the plural is saying the us and our image, is trying to explain that what it means to represent the image of God within creation doesn't mean that each human is going to, be able to fully do that, but humanity as a whole can do that act of being the image of God within creation.
Interesting. From a literary perspective, it's common to hear an author reference like, let us take a look at this now.
Sure. Yeah.
And so, if this is intended to be a message to humanity, which it doesn't seem like it's intended to be anything other than that, the telling of the story, it would seem that is who is being potentially included. And God said, let us. Well, let us, the reader. And right. The readership is humanity.
Yeah, but he does say make, right? And so humanity's not making ourselves. And he also says our image, and humanity is not.
Yeah, that's where it becomes interesting,
right?
That's
we don't have an image yet, But God has an image, but his image is infinite, therefore multifaceted. And humans can't be God, therefore we can't individually obviously represent his image within creation. And obviously by it being within creation, it's already a scaled down version of that image, and we'll get into that more in the next episode here. But the idea being that collectively humanity might come together in a way that represents the plurality of God within creation. So in other words, this act of being the image of God within creation, whatever that means, is something that we do collectively, not necessarily individually.
Interesting. I'm trying to reconcile and maybe even process the idea better, because what I'm hearing is that let us make man in our image. So you're suggesting that, as far as I'm understanding you, is that it is not saying that is an invite to be collective. It is more so saying that humanity reflects the plurality of God. The plurality of humanity reflects the plurality of God. That's the concept you're getting at? Or you're saying that this is an invite to humanity to be involved in the process.
This is where
the us references.
Yeah, this is tough because there's so many overlapping ideas. So I will foreshadow what we're going to get into next episode, which is what does it mean to be the image of God, right? And I'll offer the summary here, and we'll look at it in more detail. But the one sentence summary is: what it means to be the image of God is to be what God would be were he to exist within this creation, within this dynamic, within this box that is creation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Creation is not an infinite thing, it's a box, as we've talked
Mm-hmm.
about before. So what would God be were he to exist inside that box? That is what it means to be the image of God.
Mm-hmm.
Thus you see that, fully fulfilled in the idea of Christ. But my suggestion here is that, okay, the answer to that riddle of what would God be were he to exist in that box is not something that any one of us can do on our own. It is something that is a collective responsibility. It collectively we can come together, and each of us
Plural.
doing our individual parts within it, the plurality of all of us doing our individual parts will lead to humanity as a whole being that image of God. Just as the people doing their parts individually comes together collectively to be the church, right? And the church,
Correct.
we understand the
Correct.
church to be both singular and plural, right? And in a way, that's what we're getting here. We've seen a singular God in a sense, other than, at the beginning here, that term being both singular and plural. But in creation, we've seen a sort of a singular representation of God, and here we see a plural representation, and God is both sort of singular and plural in this sense. And so the plurality of humanity doing their individual parts can collectively come together to, as a macro organism, represent the image of God.
So what I see that you're what I think you're saying then is you're not necessarily even speaking to what our or us, the plural of that, is referencing. You're not saying whether the us means man and God, or whether the us means the God and angels, or the Trinity, or whatever. Mm-hmm. What you seem to be saying is what is the significance that there is a plural form here?
Yeah,
is that fair? That seems to be what this interpretation is.
Yeah, what does that sort of symbolize in this sort of order sense, right? That we've been thinking about.
The significance of that is that man as a plurality can bear the image of God.
Yes.
Okay, that makes more sense, rather than saying us involved is because when you say let us make man in our image, if you say us is a reference to humanity, well, if it's a reference to humanity, then you're saying that humanity is taking part in the creation of humanity.
It's not a reference to humanity. It's a reference to the plurality that is God. Yeah.
And the reason it's attached here is because it's attached.
It's about the plurality of humanity.
Plural here is because humans are plural. Okay, that makes more sense.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So it's not about referencing these different entities that are with God, or that God exists as far as the Trinity goes. It doesn't really have anything to do with that. It has to do with the fact that because God is infinite, there's a way in which he is plural then, right? He's both singular and plural if you're infinite. And we're referencing sort of the plurality of God, and that to capture that image, to be that thing, it is about the plurality of humanity coming together into that image form, rather than us individually necessarily being able to do that. Obviously, we would fail at an individual level, right? But as a whole, perhaps we stand some shadow of a chance of being that image within creation. Or at least that is, let's put it this way, that's the intended purpose behind humanity. So it's about the creation of humanity as a whole here, not the individual human. So all right, and then so that is an interpretation of the us, I guess. I don't know that it's more or less correct than any of the other ones. It may be in addition to, right? I think we've talked a little bit about taking sort of a yes and approach. And so maybe the us there both is meant to indicate something like what we've described, as well as a reference to some sort of divine counsel thing or something like that, right? God is capable of multiple things at once being captured into the phrases within this chapter. So yeah, that's one take on it. And then real quick before we get into the next episode where we really talk about this image component, I just want to point out that here we see, at least within the Bible, the expression of man as being of a higher order, something we talked about, I think the last 2 episodes, maybe we brought that up. But here we see man as being set above the animals, right? Because he exists to rule over them. So clearly he is above them. Yet below God, because humanity is not God, it is the image of God, right? So that's necessarily a lesser than that real thing, right? And an image of Mount Everest is not the same as Mount Everest. It's a lesser thing than that. So we see humanity being slotted in here in this sort of spot in the hierarchy of order. And then we also see here that I guess we could say too, we also see plant life and those kind of things slotted in. We'll get to that more actually in a minute here. But not in a minute, I guess, in a few episodes. But the idea being the idea of what is lower in the order exists to serve that which is higher, right? The animals are above the plants, and the plants exist to serve the animals, and then humans and the animals exist to serve man in some way, and then man exists to serve God.
Can I pause here and insert something that it references our most recent episode, the one where we recently talked about the animals being created, and you were providing a framework potentially for the 3 different types of lives of animals: livestock, creeping things, beasts of the earth. And you divided them up. This is just a review. You can listen to the episode too, but livestock were animals that had some sort of service or some sort of service to humanity. Creeping things were things that didn't. They were indifferent to humanity, whereas beasts of the earth were things that were antagonistic to humanity. If you look at what man has dominion over, he has dominion over fish of the sea, birds of the heavens, livestock, and creeping things. He does not have dominion over beasts of the earth.
Right.
So that provides a potential support for that interpretation, because the things that are antagonistic to man, especially to ancient man, they would not view themselves as having particular dominion over top of them.
Yeah, well, being able to rule over them. Yeah, I mean,
they can't, because they're antagonistic.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, they can't. And
it's very interesting that's omitted. While creeping things is still included, and livestock is still included. All of that is specifically fish of the sea, birds, but it is noticeable that beasts of the earth is
not present there. Yeah. So okay, so that's where we're at with that. Also, in that hierarchy, we see here that humanity is in fact then the capstone of creation, right? We were building up until this point, and creation exists with humanity as playing this sort of peak role, this top of the hierarchy role, a kind of regent type role, maybe something like that, because not God, but in place of God. And so we'll take a look more at that the next episode as we really get into what it means to be the image of God. We've had some hints here, but we'll dive in deep next episode. So be sure to subscribe wherever you can, rate, review, leave comments, questions if you want, and I'm sure you can also write to us and tell me that my interpretations are insane if you'd like to as well. Feel free to do so. Unschooltheology@protonmail.com, and we'll be back soon for our next episode.